Hello, hello, hello. While we were doing all of the many 2017 lists that I made in January, we hit another milestone on the channel, 1,200 subscribers. How exciting! Now we're, I think, at like 1,250, so this video is a little late, but you know. So while I was making those lists, I had a really good time talking about music and sharing the music I like with people. When I was blogging a lot more than doing this channel, music was the primary focus. And then as this channel became more popular, and I kind of shifted my attention to it, the focus became manga. But I'd like to talk about music more. I'd like to kind of share my thoughts on current music as music comes out and stuff. And I don't know what all sorts of content I'd like to get into, or even if there would be like an audience for that, if my current audience is at all interested in that, or if I can find expand my audience to people that are interested in it. I don't know, but whatever. So I thought if this is something I want to go forward with, then I would like to kind of share with you the sort of music that we might be talking about and see if you're really interested at all in the first place. So this list is of my 12 favorite music genres, and you'll see that I've kind of played a little fast and loose with the definition of a genre, but hey, so does everybody. Genre is like a very, very open term, and all genre sorting and categorizing is at best a very crude approximation. So please don't debate over that. All right, the first one we're going to talk about is very definitively a genre. It's shoegaze. The origins of this name for the genre either come from the fact that the guitarists plug their guitars into an extreme array of pedals, which I've illustrated here, all of which do things like distort the sound somewhat, or echo it, or add kind of noise or muffling sounds or whatever. Um, and that they basically have to play this like new hybrid instrument where they're both playing guitar and staring down at their feet, shoegazing to hit all of the pedals. The other origin I've heard, the other explanation I've heard is that it's just because people who make shoegaze and people who listen to shoegaze are kind of the depressed loner type crowd that probably have their hoods up and are standing around like this all the time gazing down at their shoes. So probably between those two descriptions, you can get a pretty good idea of what this sounds like. It's very kind of dreamy, hazy music with kind of these big walls of sound and noise that kind of puts you in this almost like kind of trance-like zoned out state. Um, as it's not my favorite genre. It's my 12th favorite genre, but it is one that I'm very interested in, and I'm always looking for new examples of it because the feeling that I want when I listen to shoegaze is something that only shoegaze can give me, and it's like I'm always looking for a pure and more complete form of that sound. Um, so yeah, it's definitely one to check out. It's something that's kind of like flirted with mainstream rock and such, so you will hear elements of it in some kind of like more radio friendly songs. But for me, as I said, I'm more looking for that pure experience, so I try to dive into the real depths of it. Next, we have noise. So this is definitely one where I've very much gone outside the idea of what a genre of music is, mostly because noise is not music at all. The idea of listening to noise, which kind of stems from things like Dadaism and music concrete and experiments like field recordings and such, basically just asks you to rethink the boundaries of what you want from music and what you just want from the auditory sensation. So my experience with noise is not like super comprehensive. It's again not something that I turn to too often, which is why I put it lower on this list. Um, but it is something that I'm very interested in, and I'm trying to kind of find the extremes of in many directions. So there's genres like harsh noise, or subgenres, I should say, in order to not validate my own list. There's subgenres like harsh noise where it really is just about like as penetrating and painful sounds that they can make. There's harsh noise bands that I've heard that like sample dental surgery and the sounds of dental drills colliding with flesh and stuff, and it makes your skin crawl. And then there's other ones that are more about like the pure sine wave type experience, and try to kind of contextualize in this aesthetic of drifting through space or just being released from your body entirely. Then we get more like kind of noise integration with kind of traditional bands, things like noise rock or noise pop, which I'm really big into. I find they give me this like really cathartic feeling of release. Like this really is all about just kind of the intensity of sensation. And there's a noise artist that I've been kind of interested in recently, and I can never pronounce his name. It's like Rudolph and Enner or something, and there's like a period in the last name, but whatever. Um, who defended his art, or kind of expressed it by saying, uh, what was it? Art is for the opening up of senses, not for shutting them down. And that I think is a really interesting perspective to view noise from, and to view the sensations you get from going to these really extreme territories of harsh noise and brutal noise, is thinking about how wide your auditory sensations have been opened up. Okay. Next, backpacker hip hop. This is another very hard to pin down, very wide genre. You kind of define it in opposition to regular hip hop, where backpacker hip hop is kind of hip hop for hip hop nerds. It's much more about the lyrics, whether that lyrical focus comes from storytellings, one's personal experience coming through in the track, long concept albums, or that might be in kind of like very dense and esoteric type of writing, your more like Aesop rock style, which then kind of bleeds into the whole genre of like abstract hip hop, things that you might find on the Anticon labels, Cloud Dead, Y, Reaching Quiet, Jaime's Basement. I love it all. You might even extend Backpacker to include things like your sort of golden era stuff like Tribe Called Quest, or De La Soul, and then that kind of bleeding into the next generation of it like Talib Kweli, Mos Def, and then you might even go so far as to say like Kendrick Lamar is sort of like a modern backpack rapper. But pretty much ever since Kanye blew up, the lines between backpacker and mainstream have been very, very blurred. But here I've pictured my absolute hero in the backpacker underground movement, MF Doom, who, through one of the most amazing and impressive careers in hip hop, has consistently delivered some of the most like clever and lyrically dense and just kind of jaw-dropping lyrics. So in my mind, he kind of exemplifies the kind of the mission of backpacker hip hop, which is just blowing people's mind with how good of a lyricist you are. Next, I want to talk about positive ambient drone. So here I'm kind of like this list was kind of hard to put together, because there's a lot of genres where I kind of pick out a few albums I really like and I get really into them, but then I don't really expand my taste too far outside of that. Like there's a lot of kind of folk stuff I like, or I shouldn't say, there's a few folk things I like that I get really into. There's a few jazz things I like that I get really into. There's a few this and that or whatever. And kind of all the constituent elements of this genre, I would kind of say the same thing for. There's a few ambient acts I really like. There's a few drone acts I really like. There's this kind of like IDM subset of mostly IDM acts that do the occasional sort of ambient track that I'm really into. And I decided to try to just smush these all together into one genre, positive ambient drone, and act like that's okay, and that this genre really exists. But it's my list, so I'm gonna do it. This music I would characterize as being like very languid, not really based around big climaxes or changes or progression as much as just sort of small ambient loops that kind of drift around each other. And I threw in this word positive because the majority of this music is more kind of on the dark side of things, more kind of arising from like doom metal and such, and being more about kind of like deep nighttime scenes or whatever. But what I'm looking for is music that can inspire this kind of beautiful image. So I'm going to link some, for all of these genres, I'm going to link some examples in the description. So if none of this makes sense, maybe just listen to them, see if you like them. I'm really into a couple like positive drone acts. To me, it seems like the good end for music, that if you kind of take just the most pleasant elements of music to their most extreme conclusions, you would arrive at a genre like this, which is just abstracted from all kind of greater melodies and stuff. Just those little moments of joy that emerge when you're listening to music. It's very, very, very wonderful to listen to. Okay, next is classic rock. Unlike pretty much all of the other genres on this list, this is one where my taste in it is mostly defined by my dad, and not by myself, as it is for all the other genres. Classic rock is like a staple of our mutual soundtrack when we're driving up to our cottage and stuff. We will listen to other things, like sometimes I'll play hip hop albums for him and such, and he really likes that, but for the most part, we're listening to classic rock radio or classic rock albums. And my feelings towards the genre, largely because it is so based in radio, are it's sort of less about things that I really like, that I personally have looked for, as it is a little fly is buzzing around. My favorite things that would emerge kind of from that radio randomness that I would leap out at and be like, yeah, this one's a banger or whatever. So it's also much more like singles driven than albums driven, but classic rock radio gives you like a really good spread of stuff, especially here in Canada because of our Canadian content laws. They have to play a base minimum, I think, of like 25% Canadian music. So you get to find out about like a lot of really cool Canadian bands that maybe don't make it south of the border too often. Blood, Sweat, and Tears, they're Canadian, right? And Chilliwack, and became a big Rush fan for a while. Tragically Hip. I guess Tragically Hip is more modern rock. Neil Young, of course, a legend, an icon. I really hope and feel like all over the world. Um, what other? And then, of course, I'm into like the classics among classics. There's some Rolling Stone songs that I just absolutely love. There's one that my dad really got me into called "Can't You Hear Me Knockin'." I think is just a fantastic Rolling Stones song. The Beatles, of course, it even pretty much goes without saying. Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin. The Beach Boys are probably my favorite among ones that I myself go to listen to on my own and not just kind of like wait for the radio to give me. I wanted to picture here Little Feat. This is my dad's favorite band. This is one that doesn't get a whole lot of radio airplay, but we listen to their albums quite a bit. They're fantastic. It's just a really rich blend of the bests of scenes from like classic rock and blues and funk and jazz, and it's a really eclectic band that was trying to do something that like not a lot of other bands were doing, but did it really, really, really well. So yeah, I'll make sure to link one of their songs. I think they're really underappreciated, that they didn't really get the legacy that they deserve for being so far ahead of the scene in so many ways. Okay, what's next? IDM. So this rather unfortunate genre name stands for Intelligent Dance Music. And Aphex Twin, who's one of like the godfathers of it, and I think one of the first people that this genre name applied to, that hates this name, and I think he wants people to call it brain dance, but I never liked that either. No, did he say brain dance? Was that a joke? He had some other name that he liked. At any rate, IDM is characterized by kind of having the fundamental beat and rhythm of normal dance music, but the complexity is taken up like 5 orders of magnitude, and involves all sorts of crazy beat patterns and really interestingly programmed drums, samples, really gorgeous synth work, pulling together a whole bunch of different genre conventions. Like Aphex Twin is sort of really into orchestral work, and you can kind of hear it in a lot of his music. Whereas Venetian Snares, this is a Venetian Snares spectrograph, where he famously inserted a picture of a cat. And the song is called Songs About My Cats, or the album is called that or something. He's really into Baroque music, and you can kind of feel those inspirations come through in his samples and his composition. Whereas somebody like Igor, who I'm into, who kind of blends metal and IDM and also swing music. So it's kind of a way of taking all sorts of other genres and other composition conventions and just chopping them up into a million pieces and reassembling them in the most absurd and engrossing ways. This is a genre that you probably aren't going to dance to, despite the name, but it makes really good music for like intense concentration, playing very, very fast video games and such. I remember grinding out Tetris sprint runs for hours on end, listening to Venetian Snare songs and feeling my mind just fractal outward into this terrifying beast. Wow, that sounds like a great recommendation, huh? Doesn't it? Okay, what's next? Post-rock. This is a genre I got very, very much into as a teenager. It seemed like the most mind-blowing thing in the world, especially as someone who up until that point was just mostly listening to classic rock. So post-rock takes your sort of traditional rock band composition, that it's mostly guitar-driven, big drum element, things like that, but then adds kind of some orchestral elements, usually some strings, a double bass, a violin maybe, and then completely stretches out and exaggerates all kind of the songwriting structures of a traditional rock song. So this comes from the liner notes of Godspeed You Black Emperor's Lift Your Skinny Fists Like Antennas to Heaven, and from the name Godspeed You Black Emperor, which is a reference to a Japanese motorcycle movie, but whatever, and the album title Lift Your Skinny, you can kind of get the sense of this like vast apocalyptic worldview which is being delivered to you on a lot of these bands. And you can see their song lengths clock in at around the 20-minute mark on this album and involve many, many different movements, all that have these very evocative labels: Terrible Canyons of Static, World Police, and Friendly Fire. And then, of course, the famous They Don't Sleep Anymore on the Beach speech. And it's all kind of about, sort of in the same way that normal rock music is, but stretched out chronologically like 4 or 5 times. The same building up to crescendos, building kind of big steady riffs into something that just kind of explodes. A kind of derogatory label that people use to talk about post-rock is crescendo core. But from this structure, you can go in a lot of different directions. Like Godspeed You Black Emperor takes this very, the car's on fire. There's no driver in the wheel. The streets run red with 1,000 lonely suicides, and a dark wind blows. That's the start of a Godspeed You Black Emperor song, is this long, sad story with violin in the back. It's haunting and beautiful. So it's this very kind of urban decay apocalypse. Where on the other hand, you got somebody like Sigur Rós, an Icelandic post-rock band I really liked, that is more about the end of the earth in a global ice age. And then you get maybe something like Do Make Say Think, which is the end of the earth where everything kind of rusts and dust softly settles on the earth and nothing moves anymore. So all manners of apocalypse are depicted here. Yeah, it's a very interesting genre. You definitely have to be in kind of a certain mind state to want to listen to it and to have the time to listen to it. But when you do, it is an extremely powerful emotional experience. I remember seeing Godspeed You Black Emperor live, and they just kind of sat in a circle with their instruments, and there was a projector in the back playing images of, rusted old railway tracks and dilapidated buildings, and they were just playing these incredibly powerful, moving songs, often with very virtuosistic and intense performances within them, but totally impassive, not even acknowledging the audience. And you just really felt like this sense of apocalypse. I keep saying the word apocalypse, but it's the only word that I think gets across my feelings towards this genre. So yeah, check it out. Lots of bangers. Next we have... What? I feel like we missed one. Hey, where's 6? Let me consult my notes. I'm pretty sure 6 was supposed to be... Yeah, 6 was supposed to be indie rock. And I didn't like make one. I just skipped it. But I can remember like looking up, I was like, oh, I'm gonna use like a screen cap of an Arcade Fire music video. I guess I just didn't make it. Okay, well anyways, I'll just tell you. Number 6. Shit, I knew something was wrong. Number 6 was indie rock, which is another very unfortunately named, kind of hard to pin down genre that I was very much into as a teenager, with bands like Broken Social Scene, Arcade Fire, Wolf Parade, um, and I would go so far as to kind of include like emo within this genre, and now I'm being very controversial, and even things like the Microphones or Shushu, or kind of going to real extremes of emotional intensity and stuff. Because that's what I'm really into indie rock for, was the angst, and especially as a teenager, I had a lot of angst, and hearing these guys play these songs that weren't the precise, virtuistic, rehearsed to perfection things that I heard on classic rock radio, and they didn't really have that baggage of being, legendary, iconic songs, but instead felt like they were being made by people like me, people with angst, people who had problems that maybe they couldn't articulate perfectly or sing perfectly about, but that imperfection was captured in the music itself. I remember a really mind-blowing moment listening to Arcade Fire's Rebellion, where I could hear the lead singer's voice kind of cracking. And like I sang as a kid and stuff, and I knew like, ah, man, like that happens to me sometimes too. I would have never thought that I would hear that in music, and that moreover it would add something to the music, that this imperfection would actually like make it more emotionally impactful, and you really felt like he was gonna die every time you closed his eyes, or whatever the lyrics were. Every time you close your eyes, okay, whatever. Anyways, that's indie rock. Wow, real professional list making. Anyways, the next one is completely different from these last two, which I liked a lot as a teenager. Here's one I got into more recently, which is denpa. This is a screen cap from a Toho song that you may know. It's one of the more famous Toho memes to kind of emerge to the greater audience. Marissa Stole, A Precious Thing. It's a song by Iosis. And I think it really encapsulates a lot of what I find interesting about denpa, especially the kind of breakdown in it, where there's kind of this like um, where she's counting out the dolls, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, and then it goes like, and then it exaggerates even that into just the like, and it's just the row of like ones. Um, that to me is like the essence of denpa, where meaning is aggressively broken down before your very eyes. And there's just this very insane feeling that emerges. So if you don't know, and I have no idea why I assumed you would know, denpa means electric waves, and it refers to like the electromagnetic waves that are given out by electric appliances. And it comes, these are very grim origins of the term, from an incident in the late 80s where a man went insane and stabbed some people in Japan. And then in court, he said it was the denpa that were making him do it. And from then on, there has been this kind of subculture in Japan that has very aggressively identified with denpa and with this idea of a maddening sound, of the idea of like cuteness that becomes so cute it's weird, or weirdness that's masqueraded by so much cuteness that it manages to kind of trick you into indulging in it. Um, like denpa music is characterized by like kind of deviation and degeneracy and just kind of breaking away and withdrawing from anything sensible, anything expected, any kind of coherent melody is being subverted. Any sensible lyrics are being turned into just kind of like nonsense. Even something like this, like iOS's songs are adaptations of Toho songs, the video game series Toho, the remixes of that. And on one level, they kind of they try to tell a story about Toho characters, but on another level, that storytelling mission is completely subverted by just the insaneness and the chaos of the song itself. So for me, denpa is like a very wide genre. I would include like a lot of speedcore type songs and breakcore type songs under the denpa umbrella, as long as it gives me that denpa feeling of just kind of like maddening. It's sort of different than like the IDM feeling, where you feel like you're close to unlocking some sort of sublime understanding of temporality and harmonic resonance or whatever. With denpa, it's the exact opposite. You feel like your brain is just being broken, and that you're never really going to have a coherent thought again that's going to be able to overcome the incessant internal spamming of some sound or some moe noise or whatever. And it just makes me think of like rhythm action games, where when you're really playing a rhythm action game like very quickly and precisely, you kind of feel yourself zoning out like that, and you can't really tell where your thoughts begin and where the music ends, you know? So yeah, it's definitely not for everybody, but there's a certain type of person with a certain type of brain disease or whatever it takes, that I think denpa is the the only thing for it, the only poison that they desire. Okay, that's enough about denpa. Next is something completely different from that. Romantic music. So I'm a fan of like most eras of classical music. I like your Baroque. I like your classical. I like your modern and postmodern and structuralist and tonal and atonal and all of that stuff. But for me, the clear winner, the only one that I felt necessary to put on this list, the one that contains pretty much all of my favorite pieces and all of my favorite composers, is the Romantic era, which kind of kickstarts with Beethoven and some would argue still kind of continues today, but kind of petered out with the advent of kind of more modernist composition and such. So romantic music is characterized by this idea that music shouldn't just kind of be an ends to itself, or how do I always get like means to an end, and the other one, I'm trying to think of what the other one is right now. I always screw up trying to say these things, so I don't know why I try to say them. But that music shouldn't just be for the sake of music, that it shouldn't just be about how impressive all of your counterpoint is and all of your intricate harmonies are, nor should it be just for kind of the pleasure of it or whatever, but the music should kind of tell a story and be inspirational in some way. And that the stories of these romantic composers are kind of bound up in this greater artistic movement of romanticism that was happening at the time, where people were all about, let's go out to the cliff and take a look at the ocean. God dang, the ocean is so big and powerful and majestic and beautiful and sublime. Let's go and take a look at some trees or some waterfalls. And all the bougie people back then were like all about this. They wanted to have those heart-stopping moments of witnessing the sublime out in nature, or in their own pursuits of greatness and such. It's all kind of bound up with like Napoleonic thought and whatever. All it leads to is this beautiful, like melody-driven music, which were all kind of about making kind of progressions and structures that were evocative of bigger ideas. So the one that I think amazes me most is Dvorak's 10th Symphony, which has the dun, 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 and it's a symphony from the New World. And he was thinking about his life back home, having recently come to North America, and it was this like warm, nostalgic piece. And now that melody has been, as melodies often are, woven into and created a whole lot of other, oh, my race is done, folk songs and work songs and stuff, and the famous one is like going home, Lord, I'm going home. And it's not that Dvorak told the people who started singing that song, hey, this song is about my nostalgia for my homeland or whatever. It's that the feeling of it was so evocative that that was like the only thing that you want to sing about when you hear a song like that, right? And that even though the homeland he was singing about was way back in Europe, like the old world, and the people singing it in America where it became popular were thinking about like their home away from rustling these cattle or whatever the hell people were up to back then. Thinking about two completely different homes, and yet the idea of nostalgia for that warm home is the only message you can take away from that song. And like that to me is just so mind-blowing. Other songs at the time, other compositions and such actually started to involve choirs much more often. Usually up until this point, choirs were kind of relegated to opera, and they were very distinct from the orchestra section. But you know, with Beethoven's Ninth, and that's kind of an important piece of music. There is a lot more kind of choral involvement, and that to me personally, as someone who has sung in choirs, is a major selling point for this entire movement, because I love singing with an orchestra. Singing as just a choir to me is like so much less fun and interesting, and just the dynamics of like you sing your vocal part and then like the strings come in and then you kind of like wait and then you come back. Oh, it's just so beautiful and evocative. Like the storytelling element is so clear in my mind when I listen to that. So yes, this wonderful, wonderful genre. Here I've pictured the Beethoven sonata that I've been most into recently, especially this first movement. It's the Pastoral Sonata, and I mean the name helps, but just like listening to it, even if you don't know the word pastoral, you get a pastoral image in your mind that is so undeniably clear that the dun, wait, dun, 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 dun. I'm not even gonna try to sing it. That's stupid. Just look it up. It's really good. Wait. Dun, 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 dun. I thought it started with like bum, ba da dun, dun. But it actually just starts like dun, 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 dun. Okay, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm not even in key, so. Alright, next we have. This is another genre I made up. This is a genre I basically made up, but it's very, very important to me, and a lot of my absolute favorite music I've been able to rope into this one genre, so I'm very happy with that. Um, Orchestral glitch music is music that is characterized by having a lot of orchestral instruments, strings, brass, kind of a wide variety of percussion, including but not limited to your normal drum kit. But then, and it's also kind of structured like orchestral music, about like big movements where motifs kind of are like interwoven. and appear and disappear and merge with great strength and all of that. But all of this is uh, dumped in a big gooey vat of what this image, which is the cover of Virgin Babylon's 1 minute older compilation, I think really somehow eloquently describes. And I've called it glitch here, and I hope that name isn't too evocative. I know there's like also a genre people refer to as just glitch in general, but here I want to suggest like the use of like samples and kind of chopping stuff up, kind of distorting the continuity of what would normally be a performance. So in a lot of these songs, you know, there's this like really beautiful like violin introduction, maybe with some vocals, maybe a larger string section, but then that starts getting like chopped up and distorted, kind of in an IDM-ish manner. I think Aphex Twin is a major progenitor of this genre, especially on like the Richard D. James album. Songs like Girl Boy Song and Four, the opening track, I think really kind of capture the genesis of this. And then this guy, World's End Girlfriend, really took it running, and made this really amazing multi-genre, multi-instrument music that kind of was in that mode, and then started an entire record label, Virgin Babylon Records, which is my favorite record label, which features all sorts of artists that work in all sorts of genres. But I think if there is kind of a common element to a lot of them, at least, it is this sort of sound and this sort of pattern of kind of aiming unashamedly at really, really beautiful music, like kind of going back to sort of your romantic idea of this really evocative storytelling beauty, and then subverting it and making it a little crazy and throwing in all sorts of these very wild elements. And I don't know, I can't really describe it too much better than that. Again, you might have to check out the examples, given that I basically just made up this genre. But I really do love it. Okay, the last one, and it has to be this. We talked about backpacker before, and I said the backpacker is sort of defined in opposition to the rest of hip hop. So this is what it is, kind of the extreme other end on that spectrum, which is trap. And this is a lovely aerial photograph of Atlanta, which is the birthplace and still #1 place in the world for trap. Trap music is music you listen to in the trap. And the trap is, I don't know if we can see any good trap houses on here. I think we're a little too close to the city center. But basically, if you're a drug dealer, and you're running a pretty big operation, you want to find yourself a trap house, which is where you sell the drugs out of. And the reason it's called a trap house is that usually it's situated at kind of like the end of a dead end street, so that if somebody comes to try to rob you or rip you off or whatever, they've only got kind of one way off, and it's very easy to trap them in the house. Trap house. So trap music emerged from drug dealing culture, with artists like Jeezy and Gucci Mane and stuff, kind of pushing rap in this direction where the lyrics are like very, very unimportant. The lyrics largely are on the themes of drug dealing, how successful you are as a drug dealer, how good you are at making your product, how much money you have, or kind of resulting from that, your luxury items, your clothes, your cars, your jewelry, how you're able to use these factors to convince women to sleep with you. I guess when I'm listening about like this, it all sounds so absurd, but it's not really about the content. It's not really about the huge insights you get into what it means to be a drug dealer or anything like that. The lyrics are just more of a way to express the flow and the dynamics of the flow over the beat. It's all about kind of the unified sound that emerges rather than any individual part. And like the lyrics are still important insofar as they keep coming up with more clever and um, more rhythmically interesting ways of kind of reiterating these same themes. Um, like, well, I think what emerges from all of this, and then on the other side, the beats, which are kind of having to evolve and expand in some really, really interesting directions, kind of getting into all sorts of other genres, composition models, and stuff. In order to accommodate these flows, in order to kind of rhythmically highlight the interesting rhythms that are being produced and the interesting assonances and consonances and internal rhymes and stuff. All of these factors that like aren't going to emerge like they emerge from careful study of the lyrics, but nobody wants to do that. You just have to kind of highlight them so that they sound cool and they sound engrossing and really catchy just when you hear the music without having to really consider all of those elements. And these two things are kind of moving in sync in a process that really isn't so much about reinventing the wheel every time, or necessarily even like coming up with a new concept every time. Like most trap songs aren't really about anything. They're usually named after what happens to be said in the hook, and it leads to kind of this process more of like refinement than necessarily revolution, where you all you really want to do is come up with some memorable quality for your new song that will kind of keep people coming back to it without, you know, not giving them all of the things that they're expecting from a trap song too. And that to me is like so exciting. Like first off, I just like this music to begin with, but to see this process unfold over a whole genre is like so compelling and interesting to me that I just can't get enough of it. That I'm always looking for new rappers. I'm always curious to see what they're gonna try to bring to the table to make them stand out from the rest. I'm always curious to see like producers that have been following for years and years now, like in which ways are they still improving, which ways are they refining their sounds, and then what new directions are they going in, like all this kind of feeling. It's so different from any of the other genres we've looked at, where kind of the biggest and boldest moves are what's praised, whereas here it's like how can you bring your uniqueness, how can you bring your talent into this existing framework. And then it leads to stuff like, oh my god, like Young Thug, who just like is one of the most dynamic and amazing vocal performers I've ever heard, has a space to perform in trap. If it wasn't for trap, he would have to basically just make an entirely new genre just for him, and who knows if it would be good or if people would listen to it. But trap provides a framework for him to operate in, and we see this again and again with like just the craziest personalities and the craziest vocal characteristics and the craziest kind of ideations coming to mainstream success and getting the support within this framework. So to me, trap is like really beautiful, and this whole idea of like half comfort but half, you know, really being able to focus on what's new, given that so much is familiar. What it reminds me of most is slice of life anime. Doesn't this sound a lot like how we approach a new slice of life anime? That we know it's going to be cute girls doing something cute. And we know that like the specific content meaning of what they're doing, like whether they're in a band this time or in a badminton club or whatever, that's secondary to this comfort and this cuteness. But we're curious. We're like, how are they going to make the girls memorable this time? How are they going to try to make them even cuter than last season's girls, right? Like that feeling of kind of competition, innovation, building on the successes of previous things, like that to me is so fascinating and compelling. So the final takeaway message I want to leave you with is traps are moe. That's the definitive law that we have uncovered on this list. All right. Those are my favorite 12 genres. I'd like to talk about more, but this video is already very long. I'd like to talk about music in general more on this channel, so I'm hoping to come up with some ideas for how we might do that. I don't know. Let me know if you're interested in any of this stuff. I'll put a couple recommendations for each genre in the description so you can check them out. But yeah, thanks so much for all your support up till this point and hopefully into the future. We're at 12,000. Like I really, it's still unbelievable to me. And we've been over this like a million times before, but you'll have to forgive me for doing it again. I never ever thought that this channel would get any views or any subscribers. I just started doing this on a whim to kind of satisfy myself. And I've said before that, like, you know, I would probably keep doing it regardless. And I've said things like, even if you guys all stop watching, I'm gonna be out here making these videos. But I don't know if that's true. When I think about how happy I get when I read comments, when I see people subscribe and discuss, and just the idea that I'm bringing these things that I love, these manga that I love, to more people, that makes me so happy that, like, it seems pretty likely that I probably would have quit at some point if I wasn't getting some attention and I wasn't getting such a nice community building. Um, for all I know, I would have quit. I have quit a lot of things in my life. But I'm really, really glad that I didn't quit this. It's been a very consistently fun and rewarding part of my life. So really, thank you so much for giving me a reason to definitely continue, you know? Who knows what would have happened if you weren't there, but I know that you are here, and because of that, I'm so excited every day to make videos. So yeah, that's all. Yeah, we're halfway to 1300, so let's try to come up with another list, I guess, because it'll be time soon enough. Okay, bye.